Immediately opening central diagonals claims valuable space and prepares development for knights and bishops. Instantly contesting the center, this Sicilian defense creates asymmetrical pawn structures, paving the way for dynamic, unbalanced positions. Developing the knight to its natural square prepares central pawn advances and exerts early pressure on the king side. Bolstering the central pawn and preparing for a flexible setup, this pawn advance aims to contest the e4 square and hinder white's development. Unlocking the center with this pawn thrust immediately challenges black's space and opens lines for rapid piece development. Opening the central c-file for immediate counterplay against white's pawn structure. Aggressively seizing the center, this knight's deployment immediately challenges black's pawn structure and opens lines for rapid development. Developing a knight to its natural outpost, this move contests white's central pawn and prepares to castle, fostering dynamic counterplay. Developing the knight here secures central control and prepares for castling, a sound positional principle. Developing the knight to its natural square, nc6, prepares for central pawn pushes and supports piece activity. Unleashing the bishop, white aims to control the critical diagonal and pressure black's kingside, preparing for potential swift castling and an aggressive setup. Black solidifies the pawn chain, preparing to unpin the knight and contest the center with a more cohesive structure. Solidifying the center and preparing a quick kingside castle, this bishop retreat aims to maintain pawn pressure while ensuring its own king's safety before any pawn storming begins. Securing the bishop's retreat and preparing for kingside castling, this move emphasizes solid development rather than immediate pawn confrontation, anticipating white's likely nc3b5 probe. Refraining from an early retreat of the bishop, this squares it away, preventing immediate attacks and reinforcing the central pawn structure while eyeing the queenside. Securing the monarch now prepares for future skirmishes, consolidating forces behind the pawn shield. Preparing for kingside action, white connects the rooks and aims to bring the queen into the heart of the attack, potentially supporting a pawn push or bolstering squares around black's castled king. This centralizes the queen, allowing for greater flexibility and potential threats, while also clearing the way for the rook on h1 to join the fray. Deploying the queen to the edge of the board often carries a tactical risk, but here it aims to disrupt white's central pawns and potentially create counterplay on the queen side, a sharp maneuver that promises dynamic exchanges. Preparing to storm the queen side, white sacrifices immediate kingside castling safety for aggressive counterplay, aiming to utilize the open files and potentially create a passed pawn. The knight's daring sortie, though seemingly freeing the pinned pawn, sacrifices central influence and opens a diagonal, potentially creating attacking avenues for white's queen and bishop later on. Recapturing the pawn with the bishop decisively shapes the central pawn structure and opens a direct diagonal for attacking influence. Developing the bishop to d7 offers a robust defense for the king, simultaneously preparing to challenge white's queen and its influential position on the queen side, while also opening a diagonal for the queen to potentially redeploy to a more active square. Shifting the king to b1 secures a vital escape route, a precautionary measure against potential future skirmishes along the c-file and the long diagonal, while simultaneously preparing to bring the rook into play and avoid any awkward and passant threats. Initiating a lively skirmish on the queen side, black endeavors to disrupt white's seemingly serene development by challenging the bishop's diagonal influence. This maneuver creates immediate dynamic tension, potentially forcing white to react defensively and opening avenues for black's pieces to engage. It's a bold statement, seeking to seize initiative through active counterplay. A bold gambit for kingside space and initiative, this thrust aims to destabilize black's pawn structure and open lines towards the enemy monarch, accepting a slight long-term weakening on the e4 square in exchange for dynamic potential. Committing the rooks to the open files, black endeavors to generate counterplay on the d-file, potentially challenging white's centralized kingside battery and preparing for pawn advances. Reinforcing the d4 pawn and preparing a potential kingside expansion, This maneuver aims to solidify white's central presence and offer the rook a more active diagonal on the f-file. Black seeks to disrupt white's queenside pawn structure and generate counterplay by advancing the b-pawn, aiming to seize control of the queenside and potentially open lines for their pieces. Unleashing a bold pawn storm, white seeks to pry open the kingside, aiming to exploit the potential for immediate threats against black's monarch. Black boldly challenges white's pawn structure by pushing the b-pawn, aiming to disrupt white's queenside harmony and potentially open lines for their own pieces, creating a dynamic imbalance on the board. Unlocking the kingside with a sharp pawn thrust creates immediate disarray in black's camp, forcing a difficult decision regarding material versus positional pressure. A fascinating exchange unfolding on the queenside. Black embraces the tactical opportunity to shatter white's central pawn structure in exchange for a momentarily exposed king, potentially opening critical lines for counterplay down the b-file. Seizing the initiative, white injects a sharp, forcing sequence into the game by sacrificing a pawn to open up lines and expose black's castled king. The capture on f7 is more than just material acquisition. It's a calculated risk aimed at dismantling black's defensive structure and creating immediate attacking potential against the vulnerable monarch. This gambit seeks to leverage the open files and diagonals that will soon arise, potentially leading to a swift checkmate or significant material advantage if black missteps in their defense. The black king voluntarily retreats from the f-file's potential danger zone, a sound defensive instinct to avoid immediate confrontation, but it simultaneously surrenders crucial squares and potentially delays the development of a coherent defensive structure. Suddenly, the rook sprints into the fray, aiming to exploit the exposed king and create a decisive battery along the f-file. Black's queen reclaims a vital outpost, disrupting white's pawn structure and simultaneously preparing to potentially exploit the weakened dark squares around the white king. Reclaiming the initiative, white repositions the queen to support a potential pawn push and prepare for activity on the kingside, aiming to untangle pieces and find a role for the queen beyond its defensive duties. The rook on f5 now finds itself in a precarious position, its defensive purpose significantly diminished by this knight's daring sortie. Black cleverly exploits the diagonal pressure, forcing white to address a sudden material imbalance and opening avenues for a more dynamic counterplay. Unlocking the queenside is the primary objective, aiming to create counterplay and disrupt black's already precarious structure. The queenside pawn structure is fractured, and black's queen, having repositioned, now eyes the d4 knight, a seemingly active but potentially isolated piece if white can consolidate. Instigating a crucial pawn storm, white aims to break through the pawn shield protecting black's monarch, creating immediate attacking opportunities along the weakened kingside. The black bishop aggressively swings to the queenside flank, aiming to disrupt white's rook on a1 and potentially exchange itself for the active knight on d4, seeking to simplify the position and alleviate some of the pressure on the d-file. Unlocking the center, this queen repositioning aims to exploit the vulnerable diagonal and create immediate threats against the enemy monarch. Recapturing the bishop with the bishop immediately reestablishes a defensive pawn shield around the castled king, but it also creates a target on the light squares and allows white's queen to step into a more aggressive central position. The immediate pressure on the d-pawn, while seemingly natural, might be overlooking the potential for white to exploit the now open kingside diagonals and the weakened structure. Consider how this piece placement might invite further central pawn pushes or exchanges that could compromise your queenside pawn majority. A bold sacrifice, this rook lift aims to rip open lines around the black king by creating immediate threats and disrupting black's defensive structure. It's a sharp gambit, gambling on the initiative and the potential for a swift mating attack to compensate for the material deficit. Sensing immediate danger, black opts to eliminate the threatening rook, sacrificing a pawn to disrupt white's attacking coordination and try to gain some breathing room.